openness, debate. We want to hear the other side. Sadly, the Palestinian ambassador comes from a society where that is not the case, where giving voice, almost any voice to opposition, is almost seen as sacrilege. Or if we're talking about Muslims and Islam, we're talking about blasphemy, whichever way you want to do it. So there's almost always pressure to completely silence the Jewish or Zionist voice, not as a 50-50 balance, but completely. The fact you were on there, he probably finds as being somewhat objectionable.
And actually, that's a very interesting distinction that you've drawn there. And I think it's worth a bit more exploration, because a lot of times people will point the finger at people like you and say, well, you're accusing them of being less sophisticated or liars or manipulators or what have you. But in actual fact, I think what you are touching on more in a lot of your work is not necessarily that they believe they're being evil or bad actors. It's that culturally, there are a whole different set of agendas and priorities in, for example, how a Palestinian journalist in Gaza would operate compared to a British journalist in Gaza or a British journalist in Britain. They have different principles that they're working to. And so it doesn't need to necessarily be done with a sense of evil or wrongdoing. It's just that it's not the same. You're not comparing apples with apples, it's apples and oranges.
Very much. I think one of the biggest problems the West has generally, and it's one of the reasons that the UK is in so much trouble now, as I see it, is this misunderstanding. This idea that A, all religions, and B, all cultures can be equal or have to be equal. And the Western world views Arabic culture or Islamic culture, and they're not the same, through Western Christian eyes. So they say, well, we understand cultures in national because we have a culture, so Western culture, we understand these things are equal. And when it comes to religion, they say, well, we understand Islam because we understand Christianity, so these things are the same. And they're two fatal mistakes, because we're absolutely, this is about race or racism. This is purely an issue of looking at cultures that carry with them different standards. And that's what this is about.
And I think when it comes to the Middle East as well, especially different loyalties and different agendas. So where certain societies are more tribal than others, certain societies are more interested in looking after people closer to them than people further away from them. And the culture that we have here is one that tries to, it's a more Christian culture that opens its heart to everyone and looks after those far away who are less fortunate.
Yes, part of the issue is these cultural imbalances. One thing I can say as well, we have, firstly in the Middle East, it is clan-based, right? Sectarian clan-based culture, something that we may have understood in the UK 1500 years ago, but it's not something we would understand today. And because we approach it without that understanding, we make so many mistakes. What the West did in chopping up, for example, the Middle East 100 and so years ago, yes, it was a mistake. There were mistakes made. The idea that you could just like put borders between these things. Another thing that's taking place that is fascinating me is the creation of the new Israeli. Because we are talking about cultures, and we have our Western culture and we understand Arabic culture. But Israel has now been in existence 70 years. It is developing as a nation of the Middle East, in the Middle East, with its own people. And it's creating friction between West European Jewry, who are still, part of Western society with their Western culture, looking at an Israel that I believe is fundamentally creating a new dynamic. And there's more and more friction being seen there. And I think that's part of what we're talking about with cultural differences. It's not the same as with the Arabs, but again, this is a friction over culture.
Actually, in a way, it's something I've said quite a lot over the last 2 years, especially, which is that when it came to Israel's conduct during this war, it has had to try and send two different messages, and often conflicting messages, one to Arab countries in the Middle East and one to Western countries in Europe and the US. And one is, we're very benevolent and kind and we're doing everything we can to look after the innocent. And the other one is, we're going to smash you and show you that we have utmost power and control so that you are going to stay in line with how things should be. And those two things, it's very difficult PR-wise for them to coexist, right?
Well, yes and no. You say that, both of those can be true.
Yes.
Both can be.
I didn't mean to suggest they're not. That's
No,
right.
no, yeah,
but I think that in selling it, it's very difficult because often I figured that Israel will try and tailor a message towards a Middle Eastern environment, a Middle Eastern neighborhood, which has to exude power and control. And then in the West, there will be a sense that, well, you just can't behave like that. It's just not cricket.
Well, firstly, you know, the Israelis, I mean, I've seen them try and play cricket. They're not very, not very good at it. And it's normally the old South African, you know, immigrants in Ranana or somewhere like this that are trying to do it. I played bowls there once with a few South Africans. It's the neighborhood. Look, Israel is a nation of the Middle East, in the Middle East, trying to survive in the Middle East. And the last 2 years, it has sent a perfectly tuned message, in my mind, to the other nations of the Middle East. I think the message has been loud and clear. Don't mess with us. I think what they have done, and I give credit here to the government of Israel, what they have done in maintaining this battle, despite up until the US elections, the recent ones, because it was Biden before that, despite incredible pressure that must have come from everywhere in the world for them to stop, they kept going. And I've seen people, you know, talk about, well, if there was to be a deal now, then it's the same as could have been struck a year and a half ago. This is nonsense. You know, Hezbollah were there a year and a half ago. They're not there now. The Iranian, the war with Iran, all these things that have taken place that have shown that Israel is talking to its neighbors. It's not talking to the Europeans. It's showing its neighbors what it can do. And most importantly, which is where Hamas made the fatal mistake, was that they were willing to do it. I would imagine that Hamas believed at some point the Israelis would stop fighting, just as they did in 2014, 2018, 2021, 2011, 2008, 2014, you know. But they didn't. They just kept going. And I would imagine at some point along the line in the last 2 years, the radical Islamic terrorists realized they'd made a horrific mistake.
Now, you mentioned that there's a sort of new Israeli ethos, a new Israeli persona.
Yeah.
Do you think the same's happened here in the UK? Is there a new British persona? And if so, what are the influences on that? Because many people have said to me, it's not Christian anymore. It's not standing up for the values and the principles that we used to, whether they're connected to Christianity and Judaism or otherwise. Is there a possibility that perhaps through immigration and other influences, there's a new Britain as well?
I hope not. Honestly, I hope not. I see what's taking place, and I still have, I mean, there are days when I'm optimistic and days when I'm pessimistic. Right? The days when I'm pessimistic, I think this country is done. Honestly, I look around and I don't see a way back. And then there are days when you see, you know, suddenly you see the flags up everywhere and you think, you know what, there's life in it yet. I don't necessarily think that what we're seeing in, and I you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, what we're seeing in the progressive left, you know, the adoption of all these new issues, the fact that it's infiltrated our schools and our universities and the unions and the political left, are you referring to that as the new Britain? Because that I don't think it is. I think it's something that is quite, again, using the word cancerous, I think there is a cancer in society that is eating away at us. And I think that these forces are together in the omni-cause. You know, we have this, are basically fighting to overthrow the West.
But if it's fringe and it's extreme, which I think is what you're saying, and it isn't British or new British, isn't the point about cancer that eventually it spreads and eventually it kills? So at the end, maybe it's not a new Britishness, maybe it just kills Britishness.
Well, I don't understand. I don't think it's a new British. I think it is a cancer-killing Britishness. I do. Look, I grew up here and a flag waver, you know, monarchist, a flag waver. My father served here. My grandfather served here.
So how do we get to a point where that's considered radical, offensive, racist, non-British?
The first point is I am having every part of my British identity kicked out of me. Right? Over the last 2 years, I don't feel British
Like what?
anymore. Just, I don't feel British. I don't feel this is my home. Because, you know, so many people are here who hate me, who don't want me here, who are calling me names, who are violent. I've been attacked a couple of times. I've had my car attacked. Obviously, I receive death threats online every day. I obviously go through all of this. So there's a lot of people here who think I'm a monster.